Joker. I really didn't know if I was going to go see this one. I had mixed thoughts on the trailer. It looked like there were some interesting ideas at the heart of it, but I really questioned whether or not it could be pulled off, what it appeared the thing seemed to be trying to do. I'll try not to have this overly taint the review, but it's in my head, so I'd be remiss to not mention it. Some of the stuff Todd Phillips, the director, has said recently on the record about his mentality and how he approached this thing rubbed me the wrong way. And I'm not going to say I was going to make the decision to not see it, but I was kind of prepared, if it hadn't landed with a bigger splash than it did, I would have been prepared to just kind of not go out of my way to get to it. But it is in a lot of conversations right now, or at least, within the spheres that I keep tabs on. It seems to be on a lot of people's minds, a lot of conversations going on, seems to be pretty divisive in some specific ways, and it felt wrong not to see the thing, try and take it on its own terms and its own merits, and have my own dang opinion about it. So, Joker. Is it good? Parts of it. Did I enjoy it? Not really. But part of that is due to just my own mentality, what I like or don't like in film in general. There are just some things that I was never going to like about this film that aren't necessarily faults in the film. I think a good example of that is there's a pretty heavy use of cringe in this movie. Now, normally when I've talked about cringe and my severe distaste for cringe, it's been in the context of cringe humor. Now, it is being used to a different effect here because the cringe moments are being used to generate tension as opposed to laughter, but that doesn't make it any more pleasant or, for me to have to watch. I deeply, to my core, dislike having to sit through cringe moments in a film or a TV show where, you know that everything's going to go so badly for this character and they don't seem to know or they're powering through anyway. It hurts me to watch. And that's true here and it's true in cringe comedy. So, things like that was just never going to work with me. And if you don't have that issue with that kind of material, that's not going to be an issue for you with this film. So let's back up. What even is this thing? What is it trying to do? What is it trying to be? What is it trying to say? Way more difficult question to answer than it should be. I will come back to that. It really does seem to be born out of the pitch being, what if Travis Bickle was the Joker? Travis Bickle is the protagonist from Taxi Driver. For any of my younger viewers out there, what if the guy in the horrible city, pushed to the point where he takes drastic action, ends up being a supervillain by the time he's done? That's pretty much the pitch, and that's very much the tone, the visuals, the vibe. It does appear to be a period film. Everything in terms of the cars, the guns, the technology, everything is sort of locked in late 70s, early 80s, including the music cues. And actually, I will single that out. The music was clunky in this thing. It's very overbearing, the score, and it kicks in sooner than it needs to. There were a lot of moments that I think would have landed a lot harder if there hadn't been music behind them. Or if the music had kicked in after the moment had happened, or even at the point that the moment happened, but they had this real dark intoning, kind of building ominous sound that it would lead into the big moments. And it didn't help build them, and it was kind of intrusive, and I didn't much care for that. And the music cues when songs come in, they don't feel like there was a lot of thought put into them beyond, oh, this is a song from the time period that we're trying to evoke, so we'll use that. And they're not completely off. it's not like, whoa, that doesn't fit. It's more like that song choice doesn't really do much to elevate this. It's just kind of there. So, that doesn't do a lot for me. Before I get too far into this, because I suspect I'm probably going to spend more time complaining about this thing than praising it. So let me get this in there right now. Joaquin Phoenix works his ass off in this part. He puts in a lot of work. And honestly, Joaquin Phoenix is not my favorite actor. But that probably has more to do with the films he chooses to do than his qualities as an actor. I have never seen the man phone in a performance. Ever. When he takes on a role, he commits. And he commits to this. Pretty much everything that I can say good about this is going to come back to him. I feel like he understands this character better than the film actually does. But he is putting in a ton of work in terms of physicality, the progression of the character, getting inside this character's head, the vocal delivery, the tics. It's all in all the ways that Jared Leto's Joker was just a collection of affectations with no purpose. Everything has purpose in this interpretation from Joaquin Phoenix. So, like, in many ways, it is the absolute antithesis of the Jared Leto Joker. So, all the props to him. He was stellar. For what they asked him to do, he did great. The other featured actors are largely pretty good as well. Robert De Niro, unfortunately, the tail end of his time, he stuck with some very clunky on-the-nose stuff. But that's A, spoilery, and B, deeper into my issues with the film. So we'll come back to that, stick a pin in it. And then Francis Conroy's the other major feature player as the character of Arthur Fleck, Joker. His mother is played by Frances Conroy, who's always good. That's another actor I've never seen be bad in anything. She doesn't get a part nearly as showy as Joaquin Phoenix does, but she's very good for what she is asked to do. Most of the other supporting actors are fine. There really was nobody else that I recognize, which I think might actually be part of the point. I think it is supposed to feel a little unstuck in time and not have a bunch of recognizable actors. At least I think that might have been the intent behind it. But, okay, if I'm going to zero in on this film, and I was on board, or at least trying to be on board through most of it, but as it went along, I started to realize this movie knows the tone it wants to set. It knows, the things it wants to evoke. It doesn't actually seem to know what it wants to say. And that's not to say it's not saying anything. I actually think the movie might have worked better if it had embraced the idea that it had nothing to say. But, oh God, I feel like I'm getting ahead of myself. Okay, let me back up. What is ultimately the story of this movie? Is it a story about mental illness ignored by the system and by people around it until it reaches a point where it causes damage? Is it a story about someone who feels so ignored for their entire life, and then they discover the only way that they feel validated or even that they exist is through violence because that actually impacts the world and people react? Is it a story about a city gone mad and one man becoming the embodiment of the anger and frustration against everything that's going on in that city? The problem is the movie has elements of all three and doesn't really pick one to stick its flag in. It's got all this stuff going on. And these aren't, they're not mutually exclusive ideas, but if it was truly going to have something to say, it needed to pick one. It needed to pick whether it was a story about an ordinary man with nothing left to lose who just snaps, someone who with mental illness, who reaches a point where he becomes what maybe he always was but was trying to hold back, or it needed to be more metaphorical where he is like an embodiment of the sickness of the entire city. Any one of those would have been totally fine to really hammer home a theme. But by dabbling in all three, it doesn't do any of them justice. If it could have picked one, or alternately, as I said, like just decide it's not going to be anything, it's not going to try and be deep at all and just be exploitative and go for the more visceral nature of the story, which it also has elements of, that I think, people may or may not have liked it, but I think that would have been a more valid, focused way to go about it. It's... Again, I feel like it doesn't have an actual point. It has a lot of things that it kind of has something to say about. Has a little bit to say about class disparity. It has a little bit to say about mental illness. It has a little bit to say about forgotten populations. But it doesn't have none of them is the primary point. None of them is the primary focus. And I'm not even going to say they had to abandon all of them and select one, but at the very least, one of these things had to be selected to be the main point, and then the others could exist in support of it. But since nothing is primary, nothing is in support of it, they just kind of exist in this nebulous void around each other, like in each other's orbit, but nothing is boosting anything. Nothing is amplifying a purpose. And again, I don't even think the movie necessarily had to have a purpose, but it's presented like it thinks it has one. But it doesn't. It has multiple that it doesn't commit to. And, alright, so this is the one bit of outright spoilers I'm going to get into. So my overall thoughts, it's relatively well made. It thinks that it knows what it wants to be, but it didn't pick something specific enough. At least not for my purposes. Joaquin Phoenix does great work. He commits like heck to this. All the praise in the world to him. I'm going to get into spoilers to point out one last thing. All right. I don't want to dwell on this because, like, I feel the entire discussion is something that. If I'm ever going to talk about, I need to, like, devote yet another video about it. But if you want some sense of where I'm coming from on this, I suppose you can check out my video on joke telling from a little while ago. But Todd Phillips, in recent interviews, has very much planted his feet on the side of the people who say society is too PC and it's ruined comedy and it's restricted art. And he's said things that would appear to indicate that his primary focus in even taking on this project and directing this film was to make people uncomfortable and to offend people. Or to offend the people that he thinks are too sensitive. My general stance on any piece of art that offends, and I'm being very broad with this statement, but I think it is possible for anything, any great piece of work, any meaningful piece of work to be offensive. Being offensive neither grants nor diminishes meaning of any given piece. And I think the best pieces of work that are offensive are created with a mentality of, this is the thing that I am going to make. And I don't care if it's offensive or not. I'm not going to alter what I'm trying to do because I'm worried about whether or not people will be offended. So offense is not the point. Offense is a byproduct because you're focused on what you're trying to do. The mentality that Todd Phillips, again, from the things I've read from interviews, appears to be much more in line with setting out going, I want to offend people. And I don't think anything meaningful comes out of doing that. Because when you have a goal that happens to be offensive, then you can still have something important to say. If your goal is just to offend, it's not hard to offend people. It's not hard to be edgy. That's really easy, actually. And if that's your goal, then you end up with something really shallow. Because as soon as you push it far enough that you get the reaction you want, You don't need any more depth than that. I think a great example was the video game from, 2 or 3 years ago, Hatred. This black and white video game all about being a serial killer. It was a crap game because every mentality in it was just, let's make this really offensive game. And it was a shallow game that played like crap. This movie is better than Hatred is a video game. Don't overlook that comparison, but that's the kind of thing that results from the mentality of, I'm gonna trigger some people today. No. Figure out what you want to do that, and if you make the decision that in doing that you don't care if you offend people, cool. But if you're going, yeah, see if you can handle this. I just feel like that results in something that just kind of sits there and doesn't have a lot of focus and point. And I wouldn't even dwell on this, except there is a part of the movie towards the very end, and I mentioned this when I brought up Robert De Niro's part. There's a bit of it's not a monologue, but there's a back and it might as well be. There's a back and forth between Joker and this late night talk show host played by Robert De Niro that is just Robert De Niro setting up this guy to be able to rant. And there's one segment, and I'm gonna forget the exact words, so please forgive me. But he says, it's you people. And he's pointing out the audience of this this late night talk show, but he's obviously also pointing at the audience. It's you people, your system, that says what we can or can't do, says what is or isn't funny. And that was so on the nose, especially in line with some of the stuff Todd Phillips has been saying lately, and honestly didn't fit anything else going on in the film. It just really gave the game away in terms of the mentality behind it from the director, certainly. It's hard to say with the other folks involved. And Joaquin Phoenix's performance is operating at a level above just trying to be offensive. He's trying to do something. I don't think Todd Phillips was actually trying to do anything beyond just, bet you never thought you'd see that. And I'm not going to get into, I'm not even, if people want to have this conversation in the comments, do it respectfully. I will be watching. But, I'm not even going to have the conversation about whether or not it's, empowering to people, to act out violently because they feel ignored. I don't even want to deal with that. Because if the film had picked a message along those lines and committed to it, maybe I'd talk about that. But it doesn't. That stuff's just kind of in the periphery. The thing's not committed enough to feel irresponsible as far as that whole end of the conversation goes. So I don't want to deal with it beyond saying that. What this film is, it is a waste of a really committed performance from the lead. Because I feel like the only person who knew what they wanted this to be, on an artistic level, was Joaquin Phoenix. And everyone else is just kind of there. So, yeah, I'll leave it at that. Joker! You seen it? What'd you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. A bunch of stuff you can do. You can support me on Patreon. If you find me not too offensive. Did I trigger you? You can also check out my socials. I've got a book. Links, all that stuff is down in the description. Go ahead, click on it. Links will take you places. Hit the like, the subscribe, or don't. You don't have to, because at the end of the day, you're the council. I'm just running the meetings. And until next time, this council is adjourned.